Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. As a Michigan fan, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of weeks and months. This Michigan program under Sherrone Moore just operating a little bit differently on the recruiting trail. You are seeing Michigan take bigger swings on the recruiting trail. You're seeing Michigan have more success taking those bigger swings. Yes, Michigan has changed in terms of how they're going about their business. They've also changed in terms of what kind of players they want to recruit out of the high school levels as well. And I think we're kind of starting to see that. We saw it in 2025. We are certainly seeing it in 2026 as well. Now, the question is, how has Michigan changed? To me, there's a bigger emphasis on recruiting high caliber athletes. There's all sorts of different kind of high school recruits coming out of high school. There are the guys that are really, really good football players, and then there are the guys that are just really, really good athletes that maybe are trying to become good football players. Sherrone Moore in Michigan seem to be taking this strategy where, hey, we're going to go bet on the best athletes at the high school ranks, and we're going to make them good football players. We saw it in the 2025 class with a guy like Andrew Babaloa, who not only was a really good football player, but the traits and the upside that Andrew Babaloa brings, next level stuff. I think you saw it very similarly with a guy like Shamari Earls, 6'2", 200 pounds, 10-7 in the 100-meter dash, dripping with all the things that you want in an elite boundary cornerback. You start taking a look at what Michigan's doing in 2026. It's very similar. Sherrone Moore's taking this stance of, hey, give us the best athletes. We'll make them really good football players. If you're a Michigan fan, I think that process excites you because you go back to when Michigan, was always a solid program, but maybe not necessarily that upper echelon team in the country. This was kind of before we started winning those Big Ten championships. What always felt like got Michigan in trouble is when they bumped up to a team like Ohio State that had those elite caliber athletes. From an athleticism standpoint, it always seemed like Michigan struggled to match up with the speed and space that a team like Ohio State brought to the table. And you've seen a fundamental shift in terms of how Michigan's gone about building their roster to try to match some of those elite programs in the country from an athleticism standpoint. I don't think you see this more clearly in a position than what Michigan's done at linebacker. Or even go back to 2025, a guy like Owusu Boateng. Went after a guy like Bradley Gompers, a guy like Cole Sullivan from the 2024 class. Michigan has prioritized hyper athletic linebackers because we need to get faster on the defensive side of the football. And you are seeing that play out in the 2026 class as well. Want to get into some names that have kind of emerged for Michigan over the last couple of weeks and months. Talk about, hey, what does this board on the defensive side of the football look like going into this 2026 cycle? It's going to pick up. You're going to get guys coming in for unofficial visits in the spring. You're going to set up those official visits in the summer months. We're starting to get a clearer picture of what Michigan's board looks like in 2026. And I just want to preview a couple of these names. Before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. It's going to be a really fun, not only spring practice. The spring practice for Michigan is going to be an absolute blast, but it's also really going to be fun to see how Michigan builds out this 2026 class as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start at the off-ball linebacker position, where I just think it's for lack of better terms, a fascinating shift in terms of how Michigan wants to build their linebacker room. And they are prioritizing linebackers that, maybe need to fill out the frame a little bit more, like a guy like Tyler Atkins, but are elite athletes. And let's start with Tyler Atkins. 5-star linebacker from the state of Georgia. Obviously, it's going to be very hard to get Tyler Atkins out of the state of Georgia, but you're seeing Michigan maybe try to get into this recruitment. And I'm not necessarily getting up here and saying Michigan's going to land Tyler Atkins as we sit right now. They don't seem to be the league contender for him. But I am saying it's intriguing to see Michigan go after these kind of guys that I don't think Michigan would have spent much time with, 4 or 5 years ago. You look at Tyler Atkins, and it's the ideal linebacker that Michigan's been trying to go after. 6'2", 210, probably the best athlete in this class at linebacker. His ability to go sideline to sideline in close space, it's some next level stuff. I mean, 166 tackles, 32 tackles for loss, 13 sacks as a junior. This is a guy that kind of reminds you a little bit of Jayshon Barham, where he's a longer linebacker that's really, really good in space that can give you some juice coming off the edge. I think the way Michigan's looking at it and saying, hey, we especially with the addition of teams like Oregon and USC into the Big Ten, if we want to continue to be an elite defense, well, we got to just continue to get high caliber athletes who can play in space. And Tyler Atkinson, you talk about modern era college football linebackers where the emphasis is, hey, what are opposing offenses trying to do in this era of college football? We're trying to get our speed out in space. Well, if you want to be a good defense, you got to be able to have guys that can go out and go play in space and go make plays in space. Go sideline to sideline, carry a tight end up the seam, go tackle a running back in the flat. Tyler Atkinson, in his ability to close the distance between himself and the ball carrier and fly around the football field, kind of some next level stuff, in a very, very similar conversation with Xavier Griffin. Another 5-star linebacker in this 2026 cycle, 6'3", 200 pounds, does a little bit of edge rushing as well. Currently committed to USC. Xavier Griffin obviously is getting pursued by teams like Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, down there in the state of Georgia. I am interested to see if Michigan can get in it with either of these two guys. And one guy that you've seen Michigan actually get into it with and is going to have on for an official visit this summer, Shadarius Tootle. 6'3", 210. Now, Shadarius Tootle is kind of a unique guy. He might be high. He might be taller than the 6'3". When I'm looking at that junior film, he stands out with the size and the length that he has. Now, he needs to develop that frame. It's a very lean frame for an off-ball linebacker. But what you see with him is he's such a big presence, not only dropping back in zone coverage and kind of just being a guy that it's hard to attack the middle of the field when you got a 6'3", 210 with a huge wingspan dropping back in those underneath zones. But you see him close the distance between himself and the ball carrier really, really well in those sideline to sideline situations. Again, you go back to when Michigan struggled on defense against teams like Ohio State. It had a lot to do with not really having linebackers that can go out, run and chase and tackle ball carriers. You've seen this shift, not only in the 2026 class, but go back to the 2025 class. Going after a guy like Bradley Gompers, who ended up sticking at Duke, but Michigan made a big push for him. We're trying to get more athletic at this position. And I think as a Michigan fan, that probably excites you. When you talk about holding serve, when you talk about remaining one of the most dominant defenses we see in the sport, it really does start with having guys, especially at the linebacker position, that can play in space. We've seen over the last 6 months that if Michigan wants to go get a guy, they're not afraid to go down to the state of Texas and land a 5-star offensive tackle in Ty Haywood. They're not afraid to go head-to-head with LSU and go land Bryce Underwood. Michigan likes guys now. They're not afraid to push their chips in and go out and get it. Can they do it with Xavier Griffin, Tyler Atkinson, Shadarius Tootle? A couple other names to just keep an eye on, and this might be one of my favorite Michigan targets that we've seen emerge on defense, Jay Cruel from IMG Academy. About as polished of an edge rusher as I've seen come out of the high school ranks. And he's very, very gifted athletically, too. Obviously, top 50 national prospect. I mean, his ability to win with burst and bend and challenge offensive tackles from an athleticism standpoint, but then also have the power in his hands to just go kind of speed the power, go right through offensive tackles. When you have both of those traits, you are so hard to deal with coming off the edge, and he plays with such a hot motor. He's a guy that you turn on the film and say that seems to be a guy Michigan wants to fill their defense with. Guy that not only is a very, very good football player, that's also a very good athlete, but also just plays with like this like unrelenting motor where it just never stops. Kind of reminds you of how Aiden Hutchinson played. And obviously Michigan had a lot of success with a guy like Aiden Hutchinson. Last guy I'll kind of know, and this is not even close to the complete board for Michigan in 2026, Victor Singleton. The more I watch him, the more I just obviously was a big Michigan target. it sounded like this was going to be a Michigan-Ohio State battle, and then kind of just randomly commits to Illinois. You know Michigan loves this kid. You know Ohio State loves this kid. From Toledo, Ohio, to me, it's very hard to see this one sticking with Illinois. And we'll see kind of how it plays out. This is one that I don't think Michigan will give up on anytime soon. And I think what stands out to me about Victor Singleton is, I mean, he's not only got to develop 160 pounds. It's a very lean frame, elite movement skills, very long arms, and he gets the cornerback position. I mean, this is a very, very polished football player who blends. Yeah, I'm a really good football player. I'm also a really good athlete. It's hard for me to see Michigan giving up on a guy like Victor Singleton. And you go back and say, all right, well, Michigan's had a lot of success flipping guys late in the process, right? Michigan landed 24 commitments in the 2025 class. 9 of them were guys that were previously committed to other programs. And so him committing to Illinois, which is a great get for Illinois, Michigan ain't going to stop here. And I'm kind of interested to see if Michigan can kind of get back in it for a guy like Victor Singleton, who I think is one of the best cornerbacks in the 2026 class. It's going to be really exciting. Kind of wanted to talk about that change in kind of strategy that I think we're seeing with Michigan, how they want to build this roster going forward under Sherrone Moore. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.